So you see both are synced because the state came down. So let's just review here. A lot of things going on here. Welcome back to Arcade. I am Super Tommy, and this is part 3 of our multiplayer Tic-Tac-Toe game with Phaser 3150 and Colyseus for our WebSocket multiplayer server. Now, in the last part, we left off by drawing this grid based on the game state that we created on the Colyseus server side. So let's go to this tab here. So this is our grid, and we drew that here. I want it to be this big. And this is based on the state from the server. So we connect to the server sends us down some state, and now we're going to just draw that state. So now what we're going to do in this video is handle clicking on a cell and then having that sent to the server, and then having the server send down this message to everyone that's connected. Now in Tic-Tac-Toe, we only really have 2 players, so we're going to assume that is a 2-player Tic-Tac-Toe in this series here. So what we can do here is in this rectangle, let's do set interactive, and then we're going to do on phaser.events, phaser.input.events dot game object pointer up. And when that happens, that means we clicked on a square. Now we will have to check that it is in fact our turn first, but we'll do that later. Let's just do console.log clicked, or let's see, let's do clicked on, and we want to know which cell. So we have the index of each cell. Let's go to console here. So click here, clicked on 7, this should be 0. This is 8, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or, well, yeah, index 4, number 5. So great, so that's good. So what we're going to do is basically send up to Colyseus that we clicked on cell 0 or cell 4 or whatever it might be. So on the server here, let's say want to, so this is why we have the server, so we can keep all our logic of communicating with the server in one place. So let's just say, let's see, player make turn. That sounds good. Select turn, make selection. Let's call it make selection. And I'm going to call the index here. So it's like the cell index. And then what we're going to do here is this dot. Oh, okay. So we need to actually store this room instance when we join as a class property. So private room, and we know this is of type room. Oh no. Let's go here. Room. Of type room. And I Tic-Tac-Toe state. Now this could be null. So we do the question mark here. And then we're going to do this dot room. This dot room. So in this case, if not this dot room, we're going to do nothing. You can throw an error here, or something so that that you've somehow continued on your game even though you haven't connected to the server yet. So this dot room dot send. We want to send up a message type and then a message. So let's make all our types shared. Let's go here. Let's make a new file called messages. And then we're going to do is export enum, just call this message. And let's call this message player selection. And then in our server here, we're going to do is message. This is in our types message dot player selection. And what we're going to send up is just the index. So let's just say index IDX. Oh, yes, let's not use that. Just do that. Okay. The auto import sometimes is incorrect since we don't have the tilde set up properly in this project. Okay, so that's good, that's good. So now when we do that, we're going to do make selection in game. We're going to do, so we want to access the server as well. So just like we did for the room, we can add a class property here. Let's call it server. You have type server, and it could be null. So we do that. So this dot server, server, and we could replace these. And I think what we should do here is, if not this dot server, so for whatever reason, this game scene was started and we didn't pass in a server, which throw an error. Server instance. We don't continue if that happens. Create board. Okay, here. So this dot server, and just do question mark dot make selection. So this just says if it is not undefined, call make selection. Otherwise, don't do anything because we don't have the instance of the server. That's what that question mark means. So we call make selection, which will then send a message to the server. Now on the server side here in index, in Tic-Tac-Toe, the room here, let's dismiss that. So let's just handle this dot on message. And we want to do message dot player selection. So we get a message from the client, player selection. We get the client and we get a message. The message is what we send in the data from the client, from the phaser part, from the server service, and then client is the connected client. Okay. So from client, we can know basically the ID, and then from the ID, we can determine who the player is. But first, let's just log out this message. Well, you're not going to see it, although I'll see it in the terminal here. I just confirm for you whether that's working or not. Okay, so there is an error. This is also, yep, there we go. Okay, let's refresh this. Now if I click on this, I got a message here which said index 1, so that is working. But just to confirm for you, how can I do that? Well, just take my word for it. So now what we're going to do here is when you're doing it yourself, you'll see that in your terminal that you get a message there with index 1, which is 0, 1, 2. So that's good. So what we want to do is update our board state. For index 1, we want to give it a specific value. So we're going to do that with Colyseus commands. So let's come here to our servers, make a new folder called commands. New file, player selection commands. And then we are going to want to import from Colyseus command, and I think that's commands. Yep. Okay, so export default class, player selection command, extends command. Let's see. Right, so we need an execute. Okay, so execute is what's going to be called when we dispatch the command. So in Colyseus, we can see some more of that here. I think it's in the best practices section, command pattern. I've already done this, and if you haven't, you can just do npm install save Colyseus command like this. We'll have to make a dispatcher and all that stuff, but we'll do that right after we implement what we need here. So here, let's just give it a type here. Just call this payload. Oops. Type payload, and we're going to have an index, which is a number. And let's say we also pass in the client, which is a client. And we want this. Okay. And here, this is going to be payload, right? No, state. State is tic-tac-toe state, and then payload. And then here, it's data. This will be payload. So execute gets a payload, which is whatever we give it, which is going to have these values. And then from there, we're going to determine what to do. Okay, so that's our setup for a command. Now in our room, we need a dispatcher, just like that. So at Colyseus command, dispatcher, and let's just make one on our class. New dispatcher, this. And then what we're going to do, this.dispatcher.dispatch, new player selection command. That takes nothing, right? We're going to pass the payload in like this, and then message.index. So just type this. We know we're getting this. Index. Just like that. And so what we're doing here, instead of putting the logic in this callback, we're just creating a command that encapsulates that logic so we can reuse it later. Now, we may not reuse this specific one later, but it still makes it easier to see what's going on if we have a bunch of logic here to just put it in this own self-contained class. But it is very useful to share logic. If you split out your logic into different commands, you can just call multiple commands. You can string them together and whatnot. So here we have this. So let's go client index in our command when we execute. What we want to do is, so we also have actually this .room.state .board at index. We're going to want to change it to a different value. So we're going to do X or O, and we're going to represent that with 1 or 2. And we're going to determine if the client.d is the first one or not. So now how do we do that? So let's go back to our room here. So we have onCreate here. There's also an onJoin. And I think onJoin, let's see. I think onJoin gives us the client. Let's just check the docs here. Server API, room, onJoin. Yep. Get a client. And it's going to be client. So let's here do what should we do? Well, we can, let's see, this .room .client room oh no, this .clients. I was thinking we can put it into an array or something to look things up, but we already have a clients array. So let's just go back in this command. If we see we can reuse something, we can just move it out. All right, this is also no good. What we can do is just get the index of the client. So let's say client index. And so this .room.clients.find index. And let's see, each one is a, so let's see equals client. I can also do .id just in case, but the instances should be the same, but we can also check against ID for sure. And so we're going to assume client index is either going to be 0 or 1. So basically, if you're not 0, you're 1. And so what we're going to do is so either X or O, so like cell value here, client index, if it's 0, let's just say 0 is X. otherwise 2. So this is kind of confusing to look at. So let's go to make some new types here. Let's go here, Tic-Tac-Toe state. Let's just export another interface here called board state, called cell. No, enum, not interface. Export enum cell. So it's going to be either empty, X, or O. And I believe this should be fine. And then in our state here, you can still use number because that is what it is. I don't know if I try to use cell. Yeah, let's just leave that as number because our enums are numbers anyway and they're interchangeable. So that's leave that as is. Player selection here. Okay, so now what we want is if you're the first player, your cell dot X, otherwise your cell dot O. And then what we're going to do is put the cell value in here. Let's see. I'm looking at an error about, let me just restart my server. Didn't pick up the new file that was created. Okay, that's good. So what we're going to see is on the client side, when we do this, so once we, because we're using the Colyseus schema states here, when we change this value, Colyseus will figure that out, get the changes, and then send that down to our connected clients. So on our server here, we can do this.room.onStateChange. Let's see, state. Let's see, this.room.state.onChange. So what we can do. So there's actually a few more. So we could include the Colyseus schema here. So we have a few more, and so this just says this is a combination of the Tic-Tac-Toe state interface and the schema interface. And when it's a schema, we have a on change. So in Colyseus, there's a whole bunch of callbacks or listeners you can add to a schema that that normal object wouldn't have. So like on change, for example, takes in a callback with changes and data change. So we can do changes.forEach one change. And now this is going to be of type any, but let's just log this out. We'll see this on the client side. So this is like the changes that have happened, right? So it basically initially starts off and it gives you those changes. But I'm going to click here, another change in field board, previous value, and then new value. You can see previous value, all zeros, new value, because I clicked on this guy. There's a 1, which is the X, which is what I did there. So you get field, previous, and value. So what we can do, field, we don't need previous, just a say value. Oops. Change. And then let's say switch field, case boards. Now we know that the board has changed. We can do something. We can do this.events.emit, which is say board changed. And then we can give it the value that is the new board value. And then similar to here, we can do on board changed. We have a callback. We'll have the board, which is going to be that. Void here, context. Then this.events.on. Now we can also make this an enum of strings or const strings so that we don't have to type this and make typing errors. Let's keep this like this for now, and then context. Right, so what we're what we're doing here is giving the rest of the game a way to know when the board has changed and that you should re-render your board or update or whatever it is that you might be doing. And we're doing this way so that we can have it strongly typed. So that's on board change. Now let's go out here to game. We do make selection. We should check that the active player is the current player, but we'll do that later. And then that's create board. So let's go here. This dot server dot on board change. Let's say handle board changed. And then handle board changed. We're going to get a board, just a number. Now, really, we also want to know if the index has changed or what the index was that changed. But we can basically go here and then go through our rectangles here, basically, and do something different. So then you got to save these rectangles. So private cells, which is going to be an array of phaser.gameObjects.rectangle. Well, yeah. And so constant cell. This dot cells dot push. So we're going to add all our cells to a cell array. And then board dot, let's just do a normal for 0 I less than board dot length plus I. So we get this new board down, and we're gonna want to update our board depending on what we have here. So let's say what? We need some more information here. Let's make this of type, let's say display, and then value, which will be cell. And then when we push in here, we're just adding some more information. So display is actually going to be cell in this case. And then call the cell. Cells, no value. Value. These are all going to be 0, which is cell state. Okay. Yep. Type is from this. Okay. Display. Oh yeah. Not that. Okay. That's better. Cool. So let's see. So now const cell. This dot cells I. So we have the board. So the board is basically the cell state. So we can do cell. So cell dot value is not equal board I. Right. So that means if this is 1, but it's actually 0, they're not equal. And what we can then do is draw something here. So let's say we draw an X. So this dot add dot star, I'm going to use a star here, and it's going to be at cell.display.x, cell.display.y, points, 4 points, let's say 4, let's say 30, say 30. Their color, let's just say red. Yep, let's see what that does. Now we property value of undefined. Let's see, game TS66. Right, because these are being called earlier. So let's actually only do it after we get the initial state here. Do this. Okay, and there's our x. Well, W2 is too small. All right, we did 64. Ta-da! Now let's just rotate this. Set angle, let's say 45 degrees. There's the x. Okay, so right now, no board changed. I do think if we look here, I know we have to send that up. Actually, let's see. This probably did refresh. It should sync, but they're not, and they are. There we go. So they are synced, so now I'm switching back between browsers, so I have to refresh the other one. So you see, both are synced because the state came down. So let's just review here. A lot of things going on here, but let's just review. So we added this interactive for our cell, and we're storing each cell in this array so that we can go back when the changes come down, basically do a check to see if the state is correct based on this value, which is the cell state right here. And if they're different, we want to make a change. So in which case, we're just drawing an X where this thing is. So we do that in make selection when we click on a square. Click on a square, we go to make selection in our server service here, which we send a message up to our server. The message is called player selection. And then on our server side, in our tic-tac-toe, tic-tac-toe room, we listen to this message, this on message, this player selection message, and then we issue or we dispatch this command, this player selection command, which is to handle a player making a selection, which is going to be at some index. And on the server, we decide if the player is an X or an O, what are their pieces. And then in this player selection command, we look for the client's index. Now we're assuming there's only 2 people connected, so that the 0 index person is going to be X and the 1 index person is going to be O, which is right here. And so we set if the client is 0, it's X, else it's O. And then we set that cell value that we determined here into the board at the index that was selected or requested by the connected player that pressed on that square. And then the Colyseus does some magic here. It figures out the changes that just happened and then sends those changes down. So back in our server here, we're listening here for changes on the state. So this is automatic by Colyseus. We don't have to broadcast an event or anything like that. That the board has changed. And so we're listening to changes to the board field. Now this board field is in our tic-tac-toe state or tic-tac-toe state, the more concrete implementation here, which has board as a property and active player, which we'll handle in the next part. Once we detect that a change has happened on the board property, we emit a board changed event internally in our server service, and we give it the value. This is the new value of that board. And anyone then listening to this on board changed, and these are connected by this board changed event name, right? You see that here, board changed. And then in our game, after we get our initial state and we created the initial board, we're now listening for on board changed. And then when that does happen, we do handle board change, which goes through the board, the updated board, compares it against the drawn board, the last state we have. And in fact, what we should do is cell.value, change that to this new board value so that, when we check again, like we click this again, nothing should happen because they have the same value now. So we could confirm that. Let's just say just add X. add X. Now if I click this again, right, there is a change because we replaced it with a 1, with a 2, well, because it's the next person's turn, I'm assuming. Actually, let's try that again. Maybe there's something else we haven't done. Oh, because let's just disconnect this client. Okay. Right, draw the X, add X. Field, but we don't do add X again. And that's still 1. Okay, because before we were connected as 2. And click this as much as we want, and there's a change on the board list, but we don't draw anything because our state is still the same. Nothing to change here. Okay, so that was drawing the X and updating that state. And so if I am not mistaken, if we go here, we're not going to actually get the right draw because we don't have it here. And we talked about in part 1 using the cell state, where is it? Here, to actually draw the right board when you connect in the middle. We'll handle that in a future video as well. So that's what we did in this one, part 3. We are drawing the X here when we select. And next up, we're going to look at different player turns and switching to the next player turn so that when the next time, so that we disallow this player from clicking any more squares or doing anything. And then it'll be the second connected player that when they select, you'll get an O. So that is in part 4. Come back for that video. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit like and subscribe for more videos in making multiplayer games with Phaser and Colyseus.